have unfulfilled dreams? Maybe life hasn't turned out as you'd expected or hoped. From becoming a parent to owning a home, getting married or pursuing a certain career. Do you find yourself wishing others well, celebrating their milestones, new additions, but your life feels lacking? How do we navigate a world of expectations when reality is different? My guest for this week's Life Issues is passionate about helping people who feel invisible embrace and make the most of the life that they have. Welcome to Life Issues, Helen Louise Knight, who is a midlife mindset coach.
Thank you for having me, Helen.
So, I want to start learning a bit more about you, because this isn't like an abstract concept that you want to speak into. Tell us a little bit of your story.
Well, I guess a few years ago, during the gift that keeps on giving, COVID, I actually transitioned my career from being a teacher into my own business as a writer. And it was when I was writing that I found coaching, and it was life-changing for me. I finally understood why I was in all of these patterns of behavior, or these thinking patterns that just kept me anchored to things I shouldn't be chained to. And it felt like the first time I understood myself and could see myself with clarity, as if I'd been blinkered or blinded for so long. And it helped me to really understand how I'd got myself into my 40s as a single person and not managed to find a partner, and not managed to have the family that I always dreamt of and always wanted. It helped me understood how I got to that situation, but also, more importantly, it gave me an opportunity to actually find peace with that and to actually rewrite the narrative of my life according to the story that I wanted to lead, rather than a story that perhaps we are often given from an early age. And it enabled me to actually process the grief of not fulfilling those desires in a way that was healthy, rather than engaging in those maladaptive coping strategies like numbing. So it's my passion now to help other women and men, but I tend to focus more on women because obviously that's my personal experience, to navigate very choppy waters when it comes to dealing with or facing a reality which is very different to the one that they thought that they would have for most of their life.
And we're looking forward to getting into some of that journey and what you've learned about how we can do that, really renew our mind, I suppose, like you said, rewrite the narrative from maybe the story that we've been given over the one that we've chosen. But talk to us about some of the types of loss and unmet expectations that are commonly felt, but not always spoken about. You've mentioned there too, being a woman in your 40s who's single and not having a family like you desired. What else do you find is, commonly, maybe not even commonly, but what else are you finding in the work you do, areas where people are really struggling with unmet expectations?
I think often when you hit midlife, midlife is a privilege, right? And I love being 45, but it comes with a lot of challenges. I look in the mirror and I see my mother, my beautiful mother, but I see my mother, my body is changing, lots of things are changing. But even in terms of transitioning my career, I think is very representative of what a lot of people experience at midlife, which is often regarded as a midlife crisis, but I like to think that it's more like a midlife clarity. And that's where we start to think about the second half of our life and the direction that it's going in, and whether it's going in the direction we want it to go in, and reflect on, I guess, the past and where we've been and how it's led to that point. And there's an adjustment in that as well, you know, whether we decide to continue along that path or whether we decide to change. But I think that those are often very significant stages of midlife. It's not just about kind of facing disappointments, but it's also about facing really the next chapters and what we want them to be, and, you know, processing perhaps disappointments, but also being able to have a renewed vision, which I think is the most important thing.
Mm. And how can society exacerbate some of these feelings? You've mentioned the story that we've been given rather than the one that we've been chosen. And I started off the conversation listing some of those areas that we are told from a young age, these are where you want to hit, you know, becoming a parent, owning a home. Why? And what difference does that make when it comes to some of these feelings that we then can find ourselves dealing with, particularly in midlife?
Well, I think the issue, if we talk about the issue of singleness and childlessness for a start, I think we can often believe from a very early age that life is linear and life has a certain trajectory that it should go on, that it should follow. And there are certain stages in life that represent significant milestones in terms of achievements, success, but also in terms of markers of maturity. And even within our families, that idea that we have a different kind of value if we do and or do not manage to meet those milestones, and even more so for certain cultures. So I think that what happens when you do want to be married and you do want to have children, but for circumstances to not enable that for whatever reason, it can be a very difficult time to actually process that grief, because it's an intangible grief. It's a loss of something that you've never actually had in the first place. And so unless somebody else has gone through or is going through that kind of grief, it can be very hard for other people to understand. And I think it can be very hard for society at large to understand, because we're still basically under that social norm of the couple being kind of the right way to do life, or the success marker, finding love, finding happily ever after. I mean, I'm not going to go down in terms of the divorce rates, but the idea of happily ever after, does that even exist in the first place? You know, marriage is hard work anyway. But just to go back to my point, like, you know, that narrative of being a woman means you are a mother, like that idea of womanhood being synonymous with motherhood. And there are times when that becomes such a very painful and very lonely experience, because it's an intangible grief. So because there's no one to mourn with you, there's no funeral for that loss. You know, no one sends you, you know, a sympathy card or brings a casserole to your door. And often when women are going through that stage of coming to terms with that intangible loss, it comes at a point where a lot of women around her are actually having children or getting married. And I was even talking to my nail technician the other week, Helen, and she's a little bit older than me, and she gave me some really, really insightful wisdom, because she's going through that again, but with her friends becoming a grandmother. And so it's something that we can't necessarily talk to our friends about in the same way, because we don't want to steal the joy of what they are experiencing. So it can become a very lonely, it can become a very insular experience of grief, which can have also quite dangerous connotations in terms of losing hope and actually entering into a depression. So I think there's a lot that we need to continue to talk about in terms of this particular area, because it's not as much as it should be.
I'm so glad you've explained their intangible grief so well, because it is something that maybe unless you've experienced it, you've never thought about it before. It's not something we talk about. I mean, until this conversation, I hadn't heard that phrase, intangible grief. And you've explained it very well. So I'm not asking you to go back over it, but I want to just press in on the importance of understanding it, whether you've been through it or not, because I think that's the issue here. This intangible grief is not the same as grief, because it's not grieving something that you've lost. It's grieving something that you've not experienced and yet had hoped to. It's not something that is talked about, but yet actually it makes a lot of sense.
Yes. And I think that this is why I'm so passionate about it, is because often women then are stuck in that grief. So you can have, the tangible grief of losing someone and the devastating loss of losing someone you've loved. And you can still have the grief of losing a dream, because often the dreams that we have are so closely connected to our identity. And when we are a woman and we have those monthly reminders of our body's capability, there's this kind of disconnect between what we can do and what we've not been able to do. And so often when we're in that grief, we still have the same 4 stages of grief as you would do with tangible loss, the anger and the shock, the denial and the bargaining and the acceptance. But because it's not something that we speak about, because it's not something that's generally acknowledged in society, or, even for women themselves to be able to really voice that clearly and articulately, we can get stuck in those initial stages of anger, denial, and bargaining. And so we get stuck in grief rather than actually getting to the point of acceptance and being able to move forward. So this is the problem that I think that we have when we talk about intangible grief, is because it's not acknowledged. People get stuck, and then that's when the trouble happens.
And I think this helps us understand grief more, actually, because we often talk on UCB1 about the fact that we're not the best at, as a society, particularly in the West, preparing for grief, talking about grief. And I think understanding it, like, we can be shocked by it when it happens, but it's part of life. And I remember hearing a brilliant preach at my old church, Gas Street in Birmingham, on grief. And it was described as grief is love with nowhere to go. And actually, when you understand it like that, what you've shared around the intangible grief, grieving something you've not experienced, that it makes sense then in what really grief is in our lives.
Yeah, I agree totally with that. I think that when we lose someone, we've lost the recipient of that love, and we've lost their love in return. And I think the same can be said when, you want to have a partner and you want to have children. It's this potential of love and this hope and this dream of this part of us that knows that we would be so beautiful as a mother and so beautiful as a wife. And that potential within us has nowhere to go. And so there's this, again, that feeling of, is there something wrong with me? Because if we're not talking about this, like, who else is there to blame but me? And what do I do with this love? What do I do with this now? Where do I go with that? And I think that can be a very challenging feeling as well to process.
It's interesting what you said then about we can go inwards when we find we're dealing with intangible grief or unmet expectations around life achievements and goals. What have you learned then around that? Like, I know this is a big point, and it's something that I've really struggled with my lack of self-worth for a long time. I was single for many, many years. Got to the point where I actually really did accept my singleness and quite enjoyed it, with the hope that one day I would meet someone, and God has blessed me with an incredible husband. But I am as passionate as ever about helping people see that singleness is valuable. You're not a half waiting for another half to make a whole. Like, you are fully whole in your singleness. And that the Bible is full, as Christians, Helen, or its Bible is full of stories of God using single people. I mean, the Apostle Paul, Jesus was single. Like, we've done a whole life issues on this. But I know there is still this narrative around, like, oh, why are you single? Like, as in, like, it's your fault. So I'm using singleness there as one of those expectations that we are discussing in this conversation. But talk to us about what you've learned about how dangerous it is to take on that. So it's something wrong with me, why I've not met that life expectation.
Well, I think it kind of goes back to what I said about, being invisible before, that if we still have this kind of dominant narrative in our society that really identifies the couple as being like the normative in society, or the norm in society, anything else becomes the other. And so when you're the other, it's like this idea that you are somehow deficient, that there is some deficiency in character, there is some inadequacy, there is some ineptitude, there is something fundamentally wrong with you that means that you cannot find a partner. And because you cannot find a partner, you cannot have a family. And unfortunately, society does look at women, especially middle-aged women, and we're still kind of laboring under that kind of spinster idea, which is so outdated. Don't get me started on that. But the idea that women who have not managed to achieve these things are somehow have no relevance to society anymore. They're on the periphery of society, and they've got nothing to offer. And so actually, we have the narrative within ourselves that goes, why can't I achieve this? This is the norm. What is missing in me for me not to achieve the norm in society? But also society points the finger at us and goes, what's wrong with you? I've literally had people say to me, what's wrong with you? And that's a very painful question to ask someone who has often asked that of themselves. And where we have a society that doesn't understand this, doesn't really help women through this, what else is there other than to kind of turn inwards and kind of question who we are, where we are, why we're here, how did we get here, what have I done wrong, what have I not done right? And this, it's also part and parcel. We might even talk about kind of language in the church. Churches are wonderful communities and often really speak about the family and having a husband, a wife, and children as being a blessing. Doesn't really often engage with the single story. So if we don't have a family, if we don't have a husband or a wife, we're therefore not blessed. And so we have the internal narrative going on, but we also have this kind of idea of, have I somehow managed to find myself on the wrong side of God? Is there something that I have done or not done in my life that has not found favor with him? And we know so well that is not what God is about. But I think it's a very human trait to kind of point the finger at ourselves. And when we think about, we often have, I think it's up to 60,000 thoughts a day, between 6,000 and 60,000, and 90% of those are repetitive. And when we know in our own minds that a lot of our thoughts are negative, it's very easy just to kind of feed into that very negative cycle of thoughts in our head, and that becomes self-destructive. And again, we end up in this kind of very dangerous area for people.
So good. I want to pick up on something you mentioned a little earlier when you were talking to your nail technician, who's now hearing stories of other people becoming grandparents, but because she hasn't had her own children, that's another life chapter that she hasn't reached and is now having to deal with. I personally have learned that comparison is the thief of joy. It doesn't have any benefits. Yeah, we live in a world where it is rife, insidiously so. How do you deal with celebrating other people's milestones, other life achievements, marriage, if you're single, a new baby, if you aren't able to have your own, and not allow it to steal your joy, and genuinely celebrate other people's achievements, life markers, life achievements, whilst dealing with the pain that you don't have that thing that you would actually like?
Such a good question. I'm so glad you asked this. And there's so much I want to talk about this. I think I will acknowledge that it is very hard when there is inner turmoil and you are going through bone deep pain and grief about not achieving those things and seeing other people achieve them. There is a feeling of great injustice, for want of a better description. And I think often, if we're not careful, if we're stuck in those three initial stages of grief, in the anger, the denial, and the bargaining, we can end up feeling very bitter. And I think bitterness is like a canker, right? It rots your insides, it rots your heart, it rots your mind, and it's not just the comparison that is the thief of joy. I think bitterness is the thief of joy because it prevents you from actually being able to be fully joyous for the people around you that are going through truly wonderful things that if you were going through, then you would want someone to be happy for you too. And so I think there are two things that need to happen, really. One, it's got to be down to the individual to be able to take 100% responsibility for the situation that they're in life. And we know responsibility is the ability to respond, right? And to kind of go, well, I'm here now. What am I going to do about it? Like, if I continue being stuck in grief, I'm not going to move forward. I have to get to a point of acceptance so that I can lead a truly wonderful life. And so it is down to that individual to take the necessary steps in order to actually find peace. And that takes such courage. But I also think that there's also that kind of three stages of grief where we have to choose, connect, and communicate. And choose is about choosing what you need. And sometimes it might be that you don't go to the baby shower, but you're there at the christening. It might be that, when you connect, you're connecting with other people that are in a similar situation. And so you've got community. And when you communicate clearly with your friends who love you unconditionally. And you say to them, I find it really hard when I go out with you all and you're all talking about your families, your husbands, your children, what you're doing, even complaining about them. And I can't volunteer anything in that conversation because it's become exclusive to me. So we need to, in a way, actually be so much more courageous in the way that we handle ourselves, in the way that we process things ourselves, than perhaps other people give us credit for. But I think that those things are key. And then once we're in acceptance, once we've communicated, we are in a much better place to be truly happy for the people that we love, because that's what we want to be.
Yeah.
We don't want to be consumed by bitterness.
And I suppose one step before that acceptance and taking responsibility is acknowledgement, like allowing yourself to feel the pain, to not hide it or numb it. We know that a lot of unhealthy behaviors can grow through numbing pain. A lot of addictions have accumulated over that. And so talk to us about the importance of acknowledging our situation, but not allowing it to be where we stay and allow the bitterness, like you say, to grow.
Yeah, and I think numbing is such a prevalent problem when we're talking about these situations, because the pain can be so big or feel so all-consuming that it's too hard to feel. And I think sometimes even it seems strange enough to say that having hope is harder than not. And I think that when you are in those situations, it's so easy to grab the remote and binge on Netflix, or grab the bottle of wine, or grab another chocolate bar, or even exercise to excess or shop to excess. either numbing or to give us an opportunity to feel something else other than the pain that we're feeling. But unfortunately, that pain doesn't go away, and it will come out in one way or another, right? So it's vital for us to process that in order to get to that final stage of acceptance. Because it's only when we're in acceptance that we can actually, as I said, move forward. Otherwise, we keep ourselves kind of in this kind of stilted growth, and in this, we're chained to things that we shouldn't be chained to, that keep us from moving forward.
Helen Louise Knight is my guest for this week's Life Issues. She is a midlife mindset coach, and you can find out more about her work on her website, helenlouiseknight.com. I've learned something that changed my life. Simple phrase. I can't always choose my circumstances, but I can choose my attitude, which ties into what we're exploring there about acknowledgement, acceptance, taking responsibility. So on your website, you say, it's time for you to live wholeheartedly and in harmony with your worth and values. You are only one decision away from your best life. What do you mean by that?
I believe life is like a series of stepping stones. If you imagine this really wide river, and your only way across is a series of stepping stones, you can't get across with a leap. You have to only take one step at a time. And there may be some stones that are a little bit wobbly and you have to get your balance on them. There may be some that are really sturdy and you can take a moment to take a breath and to reorient yourself and to see the path forward. Sometimes there may be like a mist over the river and you can't really see it, so you kind of have to trust by feeling, or have to trust by just staying still and waiting for the fog to lift. But I think we have to take responsibility for our lives, because everything in our lives is our responsibility. And I even say that when I think about my situation. For a long time, I would say that I was single and childless by circumstance. And to a degree that is true. But if I keep pointing the finger at circumstance, I become the victim of circumstance, rather than actually going, okay, the reason why I'm single and childless is because I've made choices in my life that have led to this situation. I could have been married. I could have had children. I've had opportunities, for marriage, and opportunities in relationships that I've chosen not to continue with. And so there would have been plenty of opportunities. And if I was, slightly dubious in morals, there are other ways that I go about it. But that's not me, and those are still my decisions. And so I have to take responsibility for that. And that's why I call myself not childless, but actually child-free, because childless suggests that there's something that's missing, or something that's absent in my life, or there's something that is deficient. Whereas child-free is a choice. Yeah. And even just that, changing the language from being childless and child-free, has given me so much more agency in my life, and has given me a new opportunity to kind of go, all right, what's the next step then for me? If this is not my path, what is? What is my purpose? Because it isn't just that one linear trajectory that we're all on. And this is what creates the rich texture and fabric of life, right? We are all different. We all have our own stories. And owning that has been liberating.
Yeah. And this speaks into the importance of language, right? You've touched on it there. Just changing that word or that phrase from childless to child-free has helped you so much reframe how you see yourself, how you approach conversations and situations. I know when I was single, I preferred the word solo. Now, there's nothing wrong with the word single, but I think it was the association of that word and the lack that can often come alongside it. Whereas I was like, I'm solo. Like, it's just having a different word, or even another one, actually, not so much related to this conversation, but one of the most probably overused words in the English language is busy. Like, we're all so busy, right? But I use the word full. Because I think busyness is almost used as an excuse often, or it can feel like it's a sense of self-worth. I'm so busy. Whereas actually my day's been really full, and that's a good thing. Well, it can always be not so good. But just changing the language is so important when we're thinking about taking responsibility and changing the trajectory of how we want to see our lives go. And I want to just mention a quote I've written down. I was listening to the song by Natasha Bedingfield, released 20 years ago now, this song, Unwritten. I think it speaks into what we're saying, and as a writer that you are, Helen, as well. One of her lyrics says, "No one else can speak the words on your lips. Live your life with arms wide open. The rest is still unwritten." And it reminds me of that quote from C.S. Lewis. I'm quoting everyone now. But you can't go back to the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. Like, the future is unwritten, and no one else can speak the words on your lips. But the language we use can really affect how we feel and how we navigate that future.
I'll give you another quote as well.
Go on.
So this is from Diane Ackerman, and she says, "I don't want to get to the end of my life and find that I just lived the length of it. I want to have lived the width of it as well." And I think that has been so profound in my life, because again, it kind of goes back to that idea of it being one path or one trajectory. And after we become so blinkered in the obsession of getting that thing or getting to that status or that point in life, that milestone, that we lose the ability to see the world around us. We lose the ability to see the paths and the options that we could take and to live a full life, and not just a kind of a life that is solely focused on one thing and then struggles to continue living joyfully and peacefully without it.
So then, give us some tips on how we can not allow unmet expectations rob us of the joy of the life that we are living. How do we reframe, especially when we still really want that thing?
Oh, that is such a tough question, because I don't think there's a simple answer for that. And it isn't just a one size fits all. And I think also it's not just a simple solution. I think that it takes time to actually fully process where we are now as a result of where we've been in order for us to understand where we're going. And that can be different for everybody. And I think still central to that is actually still processing that grief. But central to that is actually really engaging with our empowered voice to share our situation, to share our circumstances, our experiences, to talk about them loudly and proudly with our friends and our family, and not to feel like we have to hide through some kind of inadequacy, but actually just to own the situation and to communicate clearly our needs when we have them. Because often this kind of experience can lead to hyper-independence, which is a trauma response. And it can lead also to panic and fear and lead us down paths where we're making decisions that are not healthy for us. So it's very much about being able to heal from our grief and disappointment, but also being able to transform our mindset so that we can see the possibilities rather than seeing just a blocked road or just a wall that we're facing. And so our mindset needs to change. Like you said before about renewing your mind, we do need to understand that, God repeatedly tells us not to fear, so we need to have the courage to live fearlessly. And that includes being able to acknowledge and accept who we are right now, but also have the vision for our own life, for the future, about where that's going to be, and find purpose in that again. And dream, redream, or reimagine in a way that we've never done before, and think about what is possible for us rather than what has not been probable for us.
So tell us about how your faith has helped you on this journey. I know as a Christian, when you read God's word, there is so many wonderful promises in the Bible for us about a fulfilled life. So how has that helped you in pursuing your dreams and reimagining your future when dealing with some of those unmet expectations that you may have to let go of?
It's strange, actually, because I feel like it's almost like what the Bible has not said that has kind of helped, because God doesn't promise that you're going to end up with, a partner in a family. There's nothing in the Bible that says, I promise that you'll find Mr. Right when you least expect it, all that old chestnut. You'll fall madly and deeply in love, and you'll live happy ever after. You'll have 2.4 children, and you'll all be wearing matching pajamas at Christmas on your Christmas photos. So I think that for me, it's been a real process of actually tussling with my faith, because there are Bible verses that I think people in my situation, and certainly I, have held on to as a bit of a fist waving at God and going, you promised me this, and one of them is, Proverbs, and I love this for different ways now, which is Proverbs 13, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. And I've gone, God, my heart is sick, where is my tree of life? But I've actually realized that the understanding with that is God knows about that hope. He knows that it's made me sick. He knows that it has hurt me. And the fact that he acknowledges that, and I know that he's with me in that. And there's also the classic, delight yourself in the Lord and he'll give you the desires of your heart. And we often think, or, I'm not going to talk, I shouldn't really talk about other people, but I've often thought, but if I just pray harder or worship harder or be a little bit better or be more holy or read my Bible more, and delight myself in the Lord that way, he'll give me the desires of my heart, which is to have, a husband and family. But actually, when you delight yourself in the Lord, the desires of your heart are in accordance with the Lord. And desires of the heart are actually in him, in loving him, in worshiping him. And it's made me see and understand more, much, much more about God's grace, that I don't believe experience is ever wasted. And part of my passion for this is because I want to help other women go through this in a different way than I've gone through this, to release them sooner from pain so that they can step into a whole other world, a whole other life for themselves, and perhaps even a whole other relationship with God that isn't angry at him or isn't hurt or feels rejected by him, but one that actually understands that he's walking alongside us and he's full of grace. And he wants us to be able to live a full life that's full of peace and joy. And just because we don't have this thing does not mean we are not capable of that.
I don't have to say anything else. So good. I'm aware we have got limited time, but I want to just fit in something we have touched upon kind of throughout, but not acutely. And that is something that we are all experiencing every single day. Yet our society is opposed to it. And that is aging. Happy one-day birthday, Helen. We're all one day older today. And I am passionate about celebrating age. I truly believe that life can get better as you get older. Caveat, there are certain conditions, physical health, that can cause an issue. But as you've already helped us understand, it's what happens in our mind and our hearts that really does impact how we experience life. So how do you think we can help one another, wider society, celebrate aging and the wisdom and knowledge that comes through life experience, hearing different perspectives, and in particular helping younger people navigate their now and future too? Because for me, aging just brings a whole wealth of riches that we can then impart on others. But if, like you were saying at the beginning, often when you get to that midlife point and you can feel a little bit invisible, like you're not as relevant to society, but actually that's the opposite. We need to hear more from those who have gone before us and have lived more years.
And I think that we are starting to, well, I don't think we're starting to, I think more and more now we are embracing the voices of older generations. And I think it's so important when I think about the things I know and understand now and didn't understand when I was in my teens and 20s, even my 30s, even last year, I think it's so important to use our voices to share that wisdom and to educate, especially our younger generations, about what life is really like without removing the hope, for the future and perhaps some of that naivety, but to actually kind of go, all right, let's talk about menopause. Let's talk about what it feels like to look in the mirror and see a different person looking back, what it feels like, for technology to be moving at such a rate, you've become that person that seems to be chasing after technology and things like that. And I'll give you one example. When I also write for a company at the moment, and it's a startup, and their dress code was smart casual. And so on your first day, I went in, I was slightly more smarter than the casual. You get the right first impression, and then you can adjust later on and be a little bit more casual when you figure out the lay of the land. And I walked in to find out that actually the generation that I'm working with, their idea of smart casual is to wear socks and Crocs. And so then I felt very much that, I'm definitely middle-aged now. And so there are elements in life where I think you just have to laugh. And then you just have to kind of roll with it and go, okay, I realized that I'm not in my 20s anymore, and actually really grateful for that. I still feel like I'm in my 30s. It's just everything else is kind of getting older, and people are perhaps slightly changing their engagement with me. But then I think this is where we kind of go, just because I'm not down with the trends or with the language, actually, I still have relevance. I still have a lot to offer, and there's richness in that I can give you that you wouldn't get anywhere else.
Laughter is one of life's greatest medicines. So thank you for what a brilliant conclusion this conversation has brought us to. There is so much more we could say, and I want to implore you to check out Helen's website. It's a joy she is, and I know this, as she's shared, has come from a place of a lot of pain, a lot of grappling with unmet expectations, but how God now has helped you rewrite and reframe your life and your passions to help others. HelenLouiseKnight.com is that website. Helen is a midlife mindset coach. And I meant to ask you, what's the difference between a life coach and a midlife mindset coach?
A life coach is quite broad. Mindset tends to be more about the way in which we think and the way in which we engage with the world around us through our thoughts and our kind of understanding of ourselves. Life coach also has a bit of a dubious reputation, I think, in some places. And yeah, I just specialize in midlife mindset coaching.
Well, there you go. It makes sense. HelenLouiseKnight.com. Helen Louise Knight, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and joy with us here on the Life Issues podcast.
It's such a pleasure.
You have been listening to the Life Issues podcast with me, Helen Lea. My special thanks to Rebecca for helping with today's episode.